Good evening. You're watching RTV News in English. These are the latest headlines for our viewers in Rwanda and around the world. Rwanda has denounced measures meant to isolate countries in Southern Africa following the emergence of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. The General Assembly of the Chamber of Deputies has called for non-professional bailiffs to be facilitated in settling pending court cases. Happy New Month, everyone, and a warm welcome to tonight's broadcast with me, Gloria Mutesi. Starting us off tonight, Rwanda has denounced measures meant to isolate countries in Southern Africa following the emergence of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. While officially opening the 33rd plenary session of the African Civil Aviation Commission that is taking place here in Kigali, His Excellency President Paul Kagame pointed out that countries like South Africa should not be victimized for being transparent about what they have discovered of the variant, while there are other countries that made the discoveries before and yet remained quiet. Stationary begins our coverage tonight.
Following the announcement by officials in Southern Africa on what they had discovered about Omicron, a COVID-19 variant far more dangerous than Delta, countries around the world immediately started taking measures to discriminately isolate that part of the world, something Rwanda's president has pointed out as not right.
In fact, I agree. I saw the president of South Africa saying that South Africa, for example, was being punished for being transparent and putting information out there of what they had discovered. But others who had identified it had been quiet and they had discovered that before. In our case, Rwanda had to take measures internally here in the country, but naturally also to do with beyond our borders. And the simple reason was, for example, the flights that come from Southern Africa, most of the passengers who come to Kigali don't terminate their journey in Kigali, in Rwanda. The majority are going through to other destinations. So there was going to be an economic backlash if we just went to Southern Africa. First of all, we would be not bringing passengers because passengers normally come through here to other destinations, so they wouldn't be coming. We might be able to carry passengers to Southern Africa, originating from here, but on the way back, the flights would almost be empty every time. So it wouldn't make economic sense. In fact, we would probably make huge loss around that. So one of the measures we took was to say, well, let's wait and see what happens across the world. Let's stop on flying to Southern Africa. But I'm raising this because of the need we are emphasizing for us to keep finding ways we can be better coordinated so that each country, each airline, does not do whatever they think is suitable only for themselves, but rather, if better coordinated, seeing how we affect each other and maybe improve our actions on that.
This 33rd plenary session of the African Civil Aviation Commission comes as the global aviation sector continues to reel from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, not least of all Africa's aviation sector that lost a whopping $10 billion in 2020 alone and is expected to lose another $8 billion this year. Globally, flights were slashed by 60% last year. This is among the reasons President Paul Kagame is calling for serious reforms in the way the skies over the continent are managed if the sector is to rebound and develop.
The liberalization of air transport can help with the sustainable recovery from COVID-19 pandemic effects, while facilitating operation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Allow me to make a few suggestions on steps to fast-track the development of a single air transport market on our continent. First, investment in infrastructure is very critical. Rwanda's aviation industry continues to see considerable growth, particularly with the increase in capacity of Rwanda and the construction, the upcoming of the new international airport. These investments support connectivity within Africa and complement Rwanda's decision to remove visa requirements for fellow Africans. Also, as we have made it easy for other travelers from outside of our continent.
Other dignitaries to speak at the event also emphasized the need to learn from other parts of the world in order to make improvements to Africa's aviation sector.
L'aviation africaine a un grand potentiel.
African aviation has great potential we should all take advantage of in order to develop. That is why we should learn from the experiences of other regions around the world that have liberalized their air services.
Qui ont libéralisé leurs services aériens.
The three-day gathering here in Kigali is bringing together around 200 delegates from the 55 African Union member states.
Prime Minister Dr. Edward Ngirente has reiterated Rwanda's commitment to improving the livelihoods of refugees and forcibly displaced people in Rwanda. The Premier stated this while officially opening the 36 Million Solutions Africa Private Sector Forum on forced displacement at the Kigali Convention Center this Wednesday. This inaugural forum is uniting Africa's business and industry leaders with philanthropists, refugee change makers and the public sector to design market-based approaches to leverage the potential and power of the 36 million solutions who are forcibly displaced across the African continent. Sarah Chan is the Toronto Raptors Africa Scouting Manager. She speaks of her experience as a refugee whose family relocated from South Sudan. She believes that having such conversations is the starting point of creating solutions for the continent's challenge of refugees and displaced people.
Every refugee's life is bound to have some issues. Whenever war breaks out, it is merciless. I hope for every child and youth on the continent to get opportunities, to be able to access quality education, because with that you are empowering the person to be self-reliant, to be sustainable in this life, and it gives them dignity. 36
Million Solutions, the theme for this forum, seeks to ensure that every person forced to flee their home because of violence, persecution or conflict in Africa has the support, resources and tools to rebuild their lives through convening, among other institutions, the private sector to forge a way forward for this challenge.
Private sector has a lot of opportunity to engage in communities of forced displacement. These are refugee hosting communities as well as areas of internally displaced persons. And the way that I see it, these communities are just like any other. They have consumers, they have employees, there are entrepreneurs. When we engage these communities that just by chance are people of forced displacement, we actually can see tremendous solutions within these communities themselves. And when we engage the private sector, we can find durable, sustainable solutions for some of our continent's most challenging needs.
We believe private sector investment and host communities can be a game changer. The potential of private actors in terms of financial and in-kind support, the provision of technical expertise, partnerships to enable enhanced connectivity, clean energy, and expanded employment opportunities for refugees and host communities, including through advocacy and investment. The potential is enormous, even limitless. In partnership with the private sector, we can shift towards market-based approaches to increase the economic productivity of refugees and their hosts, building resilience and self-reliance.
Rwanda is home to over 127,000 refugees, 10% of whom live in the urban setting, while 90% are settled in 5 different refugee camps across the country. While officially opening this forum this Wednesday, the Prime Minister, Dr. Edward Ngirente, reiterated Rwanda's commitment to the well-being of refugees and forcibly displaced people in Rwanda.
Rwanda will therefore continue to play its role by ensuring refugee protection, security, and socio-economic inclusion. For example, all refugees aged 16 years and above, like any other Rwandan, have been issued with ID card to enable them get access to various services. In Rwanda's education policy, access to quality education for all Rwandans and Rwandan residents is our priority. Today, there are 55,000 refugee students enrolled in various education levels, from early childhood to primary through secondary schools. We have also more than 500 refugees in different universities under several scholarship programs. Regarding the access to health care, in collaboration with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, all camp-based refugees receive health care services at no cost. Those settled in urban areas are enrolled in the National Community-Based Health Insurance Scheme, known as Mutuelle de Santé.
Africa currently hosts the highest number of people forced to flee in the world, nearly 36 million people, out of the more than 84 million people forced to flee due to conflict, violence, persecution, and climate change. Now, before we move on from this forum, as we've seen in the previous story, this forum is convening under the banner of 36 million solutions. But what does that really mean? In an exclusive interview with RBA, the Deputy High Commissioner of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Kelly Clements, talks to us about, among other things, how the forum came about and the need for broader approaches beyond UNHCR's traditional humanitarian responses. Take a look.
Don't think it's any secret that there are many reasons right now why people are being displaced. War, persecution, climate factors, even other reasons for people to move. And the 36 million are those that are forcibly displaced from their homes. And what we were trying to do here in Kigali, Rwanda, is to try to bring together a number of actors who can help us find solutions for that displacement. And the private sector, business, becomes a very important part of that conversation, because there are steps that governments can take, and the government of Rwanda has taken a number. There are steps that we as the UN Refugee Agency can take with partners to help to assist, to protect, to aid. But business and seeing that people that come to this country seeking protection, seeking asylum, have contributions to make to the economy to be able to support themselves. It's a really powerful, powerful message. Mm-hmm. So we have a conversation going in the forum to talk about how the private sector can contribute to the solutions for these 36 million.
Absolutely. We've seen humanitarian organizations such as the UNHCR before being involved in supporting displaced populations, but why is it different this time? Why do you believe for a broadened approach that is needed to address the challenge of forced displacement?
Well, one, the need. We, on the continent, we have 3 times as many people who are displaced in the last 10 years, 3 times. That's a large number of people to find solutions for. Second, we have the Compact for Refugees that was adopted by the New York Declaration in 2016 by all the member states of the UN. And Rwanda was an important part of that conversation. And the many governments and countries in Africa, as being hosts for refugees for a very long time, saw that we needed to take a different approach to displacement, one that isn't just a humanitarian solution, but it's humanitarian, it's development, it's political in terms of the policy environment that governments set, and it's the contribution from the rest of society, from business, from civil society, and from the refugees, of course, themselves. So we've had now that compact, which talks about inclusion and not keeping refugees over here and host communities here because they're living together. So how is it that we can support both hosts and the refugees in a different way? So we think it's a very different conversation now, and we see much interest in terms of trying to be part of that solution.
And what is your most critical concern in solving the issue of forced displacement?
Well, at its root, of course, it's political in terms of solutions, trying to bring parties together to make it possible for people to live safely and in dignity in their home communities, or make it possible to find those solutions so that they can return voluntarily. But there are a number of reasons that people move in terms of displacement, and that, I think, will require a number of solutions from all of us. Until the conditions are right for people to go home, they need to find other ways to support themselves, their families, put their kids in school, to be able to find health care. I mean, we've seen, for example, the last 2 years with the pandemic, we can't just address issues related to nationals of our countries, but we also have to look at those coming from other countries to be able to protect all. And this is something that I think is a very powerful message.
Speak to us about Rwanda's role in finding solutions to forced displacement and how the UNHCR collaborates with the Rwandan government.
Well, Rwanda's been a very important host for refugees now for many years, 20 years, 2 decades. And some of the refugees we've met this week in Rwanda have been here themselves for nearly a generation. Rwanda has adopted and has made clear that its policies will be very progressive in terms of inclusion. Makes it possible for refugees to be able to work, for kids to be able to be enrolled in schools, either schools that we build in refugee communities or those that we build in host communities. And really what Rwanda is trying to do is not to make distinctions, to be able to educate all children, to be able to provide health care to all people, regardless of whether you're a refugee or you're a Rwandan citizen. And this is a very powerful message, and it's a very important message. There were several pledges that the Rwandan government made at the Global Refugee Forum in 2019, and those pledges we now see coming to fruition, including in our visit here this week. I was most impressed. And we've seen as well this attracting more investment to Rwanda. We've seen that entrepreneurs and business have seen the economic benefits, but also the moral reasons for contributing and being able to support Rwanda in taking these really progressive steps.
Absolutely. As we wind up, what are your expectations from this 2-day forum?
So we're having a conversation, and we're having a conversation with some in the audience that know a lot about displacement and refugees, and some that don't know a lot. So it's really trying to have a better appreciation of both the context that we're operating in and what the private sector can do to contribute, to be able to add value, expertise, jobs, other ways that we can, and advocacy, the messaging, changing the narrative that refugees are not recipients of aid. They can be contributors to a community. So our hope from this is that we have a whole lot more businesses and individuals and others that want to help us find solutions for 36 million people, that it's the beginning of a conversation, the beginning of even deeper partnerships with the private sector.
Moving on, Rwandan and DRC government officials have met in order to assess projects meant to facilitate bilateral cooperation, specifically in the transportation sector, and how they can be accelerated.
Kimwe mu byo twaganiriye kandi tumaze igihe tunaganira ubu ngubu ni ikijyanye n'uburyo twakoresha gari ya moshi iva muri Tanzania
Among the things we discussed, and this is not the first time we have done so, is the railway line project from Tanzania through Rwanda and on to Congo, to places like Goma, Masisi, Barikari and Chindu. All parties involved agree that it would be a mutually beneficial project. We also have a bilateral year service agreement that helps us in the aviation sector. You know that we started going to Kinshasa, then Lubumbashi and finally Goma. Well, we also want to go to other parts of the country, like Kisangani and elsewhere. We were therefore talking on perfecting the agreement so that we can go anywhere we want and so that they too can come here. We also discussed partnering with them on road construction projects in their country. We talked on cooperation on the border posts. You know that we have a one-stop border post at Goma, and now another one is to be constructed at Rusizi, something the governors of the provinces on both sides of the border are working on to facilitate trade. They also agreed that we should build 4 ports on our borders at Rusizi, Karongi, Rutsiro and Rubavu. They too are to do it on their side to facilitate both bilateral cooperation and trade.
ariko nabo bakabikora ku rundi ruhande rwabo kugira ngo noneho byorohereze umubano wacu no gufacilitate mu bucuruzi.
The Congolese delegation also re-emphasized their country's willingness to boost trade and cooperation with Rwanda.
Aujourd'hui, la République démocratique du Congo a pu démontrer à la face du monde par rapport à la relation avec le Rwanda.
Today, the DRC has demonstrated to the world through our relations with Rwanda that our borders are open and that we want that our people in both countries benefit from that cooperation and live in peace. The ball is now in Rwanda's court because I have informed my counterpart that we will soon ask that our airlines begin to fly to Rwanda. Why can't one route be Kigali-Kinshasa and another Kinshasa-Lubumbashi? We need to all work together to fight this poverty that has become endemic among Africans because we all have great opportunities we can take advantage of as long as our people support our leaders in their vision to build up a winning Africa. The president of the DRC, who is also the current AU chairman, His Excellency Antoine Felix Tshisekedi, has continued to champion efforts geared towards regional integration, and it should be reflected in the fact that people are able to live in harmony and prosper. That is what will enable the Africa of tomorrow to become an Africa of development and not one of war and hate.
C'est ce qui fera que l'Afrique de demain ne soit pas une Afrique de guerre, ne soit pas une Afrique de haine, que ça soit une Afrique de développement.
The General Assembly of the Chamber of Deputies has called for non-professional bailiffs to be facilitated in settling pending court cases. The committee pointed out that some cases were delayed due to the various reasons, including the fact that non-professional bailiffs at the sector level are overloaded. Let's now hear from Sam Kalisa.
The call was made as the Committee on Political Affairs and Gender presented to the General Assembly a report on service delivery in the justice sector. According to the report, there were pending court cases due to various reasons. When they met some of the executive secretaries who are non-professional bailiffs, they presented some of the hindrances they face, including difficulties in making sure that people provide child support to those they gave birth to. The committee pointed out that some cases were delayed due to various reasons, including the fact that non-professional bailiffs at the sector level are overloaded, which hinders them to follow up on the implementation of court decisions. Among issues highlighted include some of these non-professional bailiffs who do not know how to use technological facilities needed in the justice sector, and the issue of citizens who lose court cases and are unable to pay due to inability to complete payments, or even in other cases, you find that they have transferred their property to other people. The chairperson of the Committee on Political Affairs and Gender noted that the issue had been discussed with the judiciary and a resolution had been reached.
Looking at how criminal cases are increasing, plus the increase in pending court cases, there is need for mediation. We discussed with the Ministry of Justice and they are working on it.
According to the report, the number of criminal cases increased over time from more than 34,000 cases in 2018-2019 to more than 50 cases in 2019-2020.
The Military High Court has sentenced 4 soldiers and 2 civilians to no more than 6 months in prison. The suspects, were faced with rape, theft, beating charges, as well as withholding information pertaining to the crimes. All the defendants who were being suspected of rape were acquitted. Jane Mutoni now reports.
The court sentenced the soldiers and civilians to between 5 and 6 months in prison that have been on trial for a year and a half for crimes that took place in an area called Kangondo 2 in Remera sector of Gasabo district here in Kigali city. The Military High Court also overruled a military court's decision for 2 of the 4 soldiers who had been charged with the crimes of beating and raping women to have their ranks stripped, something the prosecution had appealed for. While the prosecution had appealed, denouncing the sentences as too lenient, the defense had also appealed, saying the extenuating circumstances of the case had not been considered, or some of the clauses concerning crimes they had maintained their innocence over. After hearing from both sides, the Military High Court sentenced Private Nishimwe Fidel to 5 months in prison and a fine of 500,000 Rwandan francs for beating a civilian, though his prior sentence had been sentenced 1 year. Private Ndayishimiye Patrick and 2 civilians, Mukamulisa Diana and Nakaziraho Donat, were convicted of failing to report the crimes and were sentenced to 5 months in prison and a fine of 100,000 Rwandan francs each. Among the reasons for the reduction of the sentence, the Military High Court ruled that the military court had imposed a higher sentence without providing an explanation to the reason for imposing the sentence. 2 other soldiers charged in the case have been previously acquitted by a military court and had been released prior while bail hearings were being held. The court ordered for the sentence of Diane Mukabarisa to be postponed for a year for the benefit of her young child. Other defendants in the case were sentenced to less than what they had already spent in prison. The trial originally went to court back in May 2020, and the appeals by both sides were received by the Military High Court in November this year. Jane Mutoni, RTV News.
In other news making headlines today, while statistics show that in Rwanda, more than 200,000 people are taking antiretroviral drugs, the Ministry of Health has announced that Rwanda set a target of completely eradicating the virus by 2030, as 95% of those living with HIV will be treated to a point that they have an undetectable viral load. This was announced by the Minister of Health, Dr. Daniel Ngamije, during a ceremony to mark World AIDS Day in Nyagatare district. Let's now hear from Innocent Mugabo.
It's been 40 years now when the first person got exposed to HIV. Since 1981, this epidemic has spread all over the world at extraordinary speeds. One of the hardest parts to those that contracted the virus was accepting the fact that they are HIV positive, as explained by some of the people living with the virus, whereby among these include Nyirabatembe Florence, a resident of Chabaya Gasel in Nyagatare district.
Accepting the fact that I was HIV positive was my biggest challenge. I thought anyone who tests HIV positive is supposedly going to die, so I started selling all my property. Thinking about selling my house, that is when I joined the organization, which advised me on how I should handle the situation.
The mother, along with her colleagues, chose to form an organization called Abintwari, which now consists of more than 250 people living with HIV. This integration allowed them to develop due to the engagement in poultry and animal husbandry. In addition, they are grateful to the government of Rwanda for its continued support.
They gave me 1 goat, which later gave birth, and I also gave the kid to the other member of the organization. So with the use of the same process, I now have 8 goats. I'm not excluded from anything. I'm a leader in our village, whereby I engage in different communal activities and people like me.
That is why I thank His Excellency Paul Kagame for not neglecting us. We are no longer stigmatized. We are now living fine. As the world celebrates World AIDS Day, the Rwanda Biomedical Center RBC estimates that in Rwanda more than 200,000 people are taking antiretroviral drugs and that most of them have reached the point of not being contagious. Rwanda has set a target that by 2030, 95% of people living with HIV will be aware of their status. The Rwandan government also says that 95% of those diagnosed with the virus will be treated with antiretroviral drugs, and 95% of them will have reached the level of not being contagious. Based on what has already been done, the Minister of Health, Dr. Daniel Ngamije, stresses that the country is on the right track in achieving this target. 80% of the people living with HIV/AIDS in Rwanda know their status. So from 86% to 95% in these remaining 9 years, it is something we believe can be achieved, since 95% of those living with the virus are not resistant to receiving medication, and basing on the fact that the medicine is available and campaigns are being carried out all over the country. The annual World AIDS Day was established in 1988, with this year's theme being Dufatanye Turandure Sida, which means let's work together to eradicate AIDS. Also, in celebration of this day, health authorities remind the public, especially the youth, to take part in HIV testing to find out their status, as research by the Rwanda Biomedical Center has shown that most young people do not take the test, and those found to be HIV positive do not take the medication properly, and majority of them live in the Eastern Province. Innocent Mugabo, RTV News.
And that's it for tonight. Wishing you a wonderful December. May God grant you what you hope for and so much more. Until next time, I'm Gloria Mutesi. Bye for now.